History is often written in loud, defining chapters. But sometimes the most important parts of the story are hidden in the silence. When we talk about the history of Africa, there is a shadow that stretches across the continent. It is a shadow that fundamentally altered the course of human history. Most of us know the story of the transatlantic slave trade, the horrific Middle Passage, the millions of souls stolen and shipped to the Americas to build the New World. But there is a deeper, more complicated history that is rarely discussed with the same volume. A history that predates the arrival of European ships, and one that forces us to look at an uncomfortable, often silenced truth. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are exploring a deeply complex and painful chapter, the slave trade in Africa. We will uncover the ancient roots of servitude, the devastating impact of foreign demand, and the difficult reality of internal complicity. This is the story behind the silence. To truly understand this history, we have to travel back long before the 15th century. Slavery, as an institution, was not invented in Africa. It existed in ancient Rome, Greece, Asia, and the Americas. And yes, it existed within the African continent as well. But the system of servitude in pre-colonial Africa looked drastically different from the industrial, race-based chattel slavery that would later define the Americas. In many ancient African societies, wealth was not measured by the amount of land you owned because land was communal. Wealth and power were measured by the number of people you controlled. People became enslaved usually for three reasons: as prisoners of war, as punishment for a major crime, or to pay off a massive debt. But here is the critical difference. In most of these societies, an enslaved person retained their fundamental humanity. They could marry, own property, and even inherit wealth. Servitude was rarely a permanent generational curse. Over time, captives were often absorbed into the conquering tribe or family. But everything began to change when outsiders realized the immense value of this human labor. Long before European galleons arrived on the West African coast, there was the Trans-Saharan and Indian Ocean trade. Beginning around the 7th century, Arab and Berber merchants crossed the grueling Sahara Desert. They came looking for gold and ivory, but they also came for people. For over a millennium, millions of Africans from the interior were marched across the desert or shipped across the Indian Ocean to serve in the Middle East, North Africa, and the Persian Gulf. They were forced into military service, agricultural labor, and domestic servitude. This eastern trade was brutal. The casualty rate of the desert crossings was catastrophic. And because many male captives were subjected to castration, there is not a massive diaspora of their descendants today, adding to the silence surrounding this era. Then, in the 15th century, the Portuguese arrived on the western coast of Africa. At first, they traded for spices and gold. But as European powers colonized the Americas, they discovered massive tracts of land perfect for growing sugar, tobacco, and eventually cotton. They needed labor, cheap, abundant labor that could survive the brutal tropical climates. And so began the transatlantic slave trade, the largest forced migration in human history. Over the next 400 years, an estimated 12.5 million Africans were packed into the dark, suffocating hulls of European ships.
Current estimates confirm that between 1501 and 1867, over 12.5 million Africans were forced onto ships. Of those, only 10.7 million survived the brutal Middle Passage, a mortality rate of roughly 14.5%. The logistics were vast. More than 35,000 individual voyages were recorded.
It was an industrial machine of human suffering. But here is where the history becomes incredibly uncomfortable. This is the part of the story that often gets skipped in classrooms. How did the Europeans acquire millions of captives? The myth is that Europeans simply marched inland and captured millions of people themselves. While raids did happen, the reality is that European traders rarely left the coast. Disease and unfamiliar terrain made the African interior a death trap for them. Instead, they relied on African middlemen. The devastating truth is that the transatlantic slave trade was a partnership, an unequal and exploitative one, but a partnership nonetheless. Powerful African empires like the Kingdom of Dahomey, the Ashanti Empire, and the Oyo Empire grew immensely wealthy and powerful by capturing people from rival neighboring tribes and selling them to the Europeans. Why did they do it? It became a matter of survival. European traders introduced a lethal new currency to the continent: firearms. If an African king refused to trade captives for guns, his kingdom would be defenseless against a neighboring king who did. It ignited a terrifying arms race. Wars were no longer fought over land or honor. They were fought purely to harvest human beings. The continent was locked in a vicious cycle of violence, instability, and paranoia. Kings and chiefs traded prisoners of war, criminals, and sometimes even their own people in exchange for textiles, alcohol, and muskets. It is a heavy silence to break, acknowledging that African leaders were complicit in the selling of millions of their own continent's people. But history is rarely painted in simple black and white. It is a messy, tragic gray. The impact of this trade on the African continent was catastrophic. Imagine draining a continent of its strongest, healthiest, and most productive people for centuries. The demographic drain stalled economic and technological development across massive regions. Entire communities were wiped out. Agricultural systems collapsed. Trust between neighboring villages was permanently shattered. And when the abolition movements finally gained traction in the 19th century and the Atlantic trade was outlawed, the powerful African kingdoms that had built their entire economies on the slave trade found themselves facing total collapse. This sudden economic weakness perfectly set the stage for the next dark chapter in African history. The scramble for Africa, where European powers returned, not to buy captives, but to colonize the very empires they had once traded with. Breaking the silence around the full history of the slave trade does not diminish the horrors inflicted by European and Arab buyers. If anything, it paints a more complete, devastating picture of how global greed can corrupt societies from the inside out. It is a story of how humanity was commodified. It is a reminder of the generational scars that still impact the global diaspora and the African continent today.
If I had that pass, I could go wherever he sent me, and I'd have to be back. Whoever he sent me to, they'd give me another pass, and I'd bring that back, so to show how long I'd been gone. We couldn't go out and stay an hour or 2 hours or something like that. Just send you. Now, say for instance, I go out to the Shirley's place, I'd have to walk, and I'd have to be back maybe in an hour. Maybe they'd give me an hour. I don't know just how long they'd give me. But they'd give me a note so there wouldn't nobody interfere with me to tell who I belonged to. And when I come back, why, I carry it to my master and give that to him. That'd be all right. But I couldn't just walk away like the people does now, It was what they call, we were slaves. We belonged to people. They sell us like they sell horses and cows and hogs and all like that, have an auction bench, and they put you up on the bench and bid on you, the same as bidding on cattle, If I thought, had any idea that I'd ever be a slave again, I'd take a gun and just end it all right away.
Understanding this history is difficult. It challenges our desire for simple heroes and villains. But confronting the whole truth is the only way to honor the millions of voices that were silenced by the ships, the deserts, and the seas. Thank you for watching. This is a complex topic, and there is so much more to uncover. What are your thoughts on this chapter of history? Let's have a respectful conversation in the comments below. If you value deep dives into African history, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves history as much as you do. I'll see you in the next one.